This is the worst decade. That is the subject of today's video. So I was just thinking about this. Like, in the last video uploaded in 2024 was a video titled "Why I Lost the Game of Life," and I just realized something that I had not thought about until like ever. So I often feel like my life kind of peaked as an adult between 2011 and 2015. But the reality is we are living under the worst decade, the absolute worst decade. If I had the skill sets I had now, but like was living in 2015, I'd be way better off. Like, we're just living under this incredibly antisocial workaholic culture where the cost of living is absolutely insane, to where most people are just struggling like crazy because the average person can't really afford to survive anymore, like by themselves. Like the whole concept of the self-made man is pretty much becoming a thing of the past. Like, the American dream is basically dead. If you have abysmal family support, you're probably fucked. If you probably have to work like 7 days per week, a lot of times in your 20s now, which makes it very difficult to develop a really good social life. Because once you have assets, you have money, things tend to become more transactional. It's like one of the worst aspects of getting older. And it's like, we're just living under like the worst time period. Like, I have conversations with like people who are way younger than me that are like Gen Z, or even like kind of between Gen Z and between millennials. Just generally speaking, just talking to people who are way younger than me, and they kind of agreed, like, yeah, this is the worst decade. Like, this is the worst decade. I talked to people way older than me, like baby boomers. They're like, this is the worst decade. Like, we are just living under the absolute worst possible decade we could be living under. So if you're like really harsh on yourself for how much worse your life is now compared to when you're younger, I have bad news for you. We're living under the worst decade. This is like one of the worst decades to happen in American history since like some random point in the 20th century when things were actually way worse. I'll say this, I'd rather be alive in like 2025 than any point in like the first half of the 20th century when you had like 2 world wars, depression, etc. I also think the 1950s was a very overrated time period. The economy is way less stable than people realize. The 1960s economy was actually really good. When you had a bunch of women enter the workforce and you had the whole baby boom, all these extra workers, we just had like a level of economic productivity we've just never had before. It was just insane economic growth. One of the most prosperous times. Plus JFK like really improved our tax system compared to the mess that we had under Eisenhower. But we also had the Vietnam War that destroyed the whole culture, so that's kind of like really shit on that entire fucking decade. You want to talk about a shit stain of the 1960s, the Vietnam War. But yeah, I'd say like the 1990s also, like, especially the late 90s. The late 90s economy. Early 90s economy was not good. We had a recession. But the late 90s economy was incredible. We had an economic surplus. The government was balancing the budget. We defunded welfare. We did all these different things. It just led to insane economic growth where the government was spending less money and we had more money coming in and things were just good. Like Bill Clinton's second term, the economy was really good. I think in my lifetime as a 35-year-old man, I'd say the economy peaked when I was like between the age of like 7 and 11 years old. It's just different time. Let me think, actually. Bill Clinton came in and his second term began in like 1997. Yeah, I was 7 years old. But yeah. So yeah, I'd say really just the latter half of the 90s in general, just a much better economic time than what we're living now. Also got to say, 2008 economy, super underrated. Yeah, it was a bad economy, but at least back then, people had a lot of free time because at least if you could get a full-time job, you could afford to live on your own. Or nowadays, you can work a full-time job in California and still not be able to live on your own. I've talked to a lot of people basically have to live paycheck to paycheck while working 7 days per week because the cost of living is too insane. So yeah, this is the worst decade, and that's the video.